Make it a bit easier. Okay, so in terms of my mahitahi, we worked on the 20% marine protection and some amazing work there. So I've got a bit of a summary for those who were in the shellfish restoration piece for you, because we did do a bit of a round table after it. So is the goal right was one of the questions, and if so, why? And if not, why not? And the overwhelming response, I suppose, is yes to marine protection for the Hauraki Gulf, of course, but I would say generally the comments thought that we needed to be a lot more ambitious. So the feeling that protection was needed to also be defined by a number of factors, and they needed to include protecting habitats and representing different ecological areas that is guided by science. Connectivity between those areas was critical. Considering Māori protection methods and engaging iwi in genuine consultation and planning. And ongoing monitoring and actions of that marine protection. It's not good enough just to go, oh yeah, that's protected and we'll see you later. Ensuring communities remain connected with the moana. That's really key. So there were some thoughts around, we're keen to see 100% spatial management of the Hauraki Gulf with 30% in type 1 marine protection by 2030. So there was a lot more ambition, I think, around that question. Do you want me to continue, or you want to do one of your questions? Okay, I'll run through it. Okay, cool. Our second question was, what are the most practical next steps we can take to advance and support the advancement of the goal? So obviously continued research. That amazing science that we saw from Tim and Nick was just brilliant. So continuing that research is really key, involving the community in the science and publicising the science. So there was a lot of talk around we need to get more funding to get those stories out there and get people connected to those stories. And that also leads into the next bit. We need to help people understand what's happening under the water. Now, this evening, you guys are all going to be, you're going to have the choice, if you wanted to put on some VR goggles, which I really highly say you should, because the storytelling of those NZ VR goggles that are done by Blake and NZ Geographic are amazing. And every time we put them either on a child or an adult and they understand the living creatures that are happening underneath that beautiful blue sparkling water,
I'll swim up to his castle.
The whole thing changes for them. So I think education and understanding what's under that water is really key for us moving forward in a practical step. Again, education, involving enforcement agencies, so making people accountable for their actions, involving fisheries, we're all in this together, and making the issues central at election time and electing those who actually care, who actually are committed to making this happen. Our third question, I'll rattle through in terms of a summary. What is going to stop or hinder us? Apathy. So clearly there's none of that in this room, but there is quite a bit of that outside of this room. Conflicting objectives, funding, again, lack of marine protection education, so we really need to get out there, enforcement and the political will. And there was one table in particular who talked a lot about, the 3-year cycle needing to be moved to 4-year, because by the time we get to the 3 years, everything gets undone. So looking to make that a little bit longer. And finally, our last question, community. How can we increase engagement? We need to get everyone in the waka, is basically what was being told. So every single household around the Hauraki, everyone that is involved in the Hauraki needs to be involved in the Hauraki, and storytelling is at the core to that. So I'm really excited to see Nathan from Principles this afternoon doing a lot more work around, well, what is that story? Because if we can get that right and we're all singing the same story, you'll get people into the waka quite easily. That's it. Over to you, Cal. No, you got it. He's going to turn it on. Turn me off.
Through? Yep, excellent. Hey, thanks, Livia. And yeah, a lot of common themes coming through with our mahi as well. And thanks also again to the teams for really constructive input and really getting behind this work. So the goal, around 1,000 square kilometres of shellfish reef restored. What were the thoughts on that? What I took out of that is that it's a good start, but I don't think we actually know whether it's the right goal or not. There was a lot of questions, and I don't know if we can answer them right now. How much is enough? Is 1,000 square kilometres enough? What's the carrying capacity of the Gulf? Is there a carrying capacity in the Gulf? Are we talking about 1,000 square kilometres of actual physical reef restored and built? Or is it okay to go for 1,000 square kilometres of functioning ecosystem? So it's doing the filtering service over 1,000 square kilometres, but you mightn't actually need to restore that amount. A lot of questions around how you actually therefore measure success. What are we aiming for? What does success look like? What does it mean to restore in the modern environment? The time frame came up. It's an aspirational goal. How long do we think it will take? A figure was thrown up of 6 decades, 60 years. And then a question, is it realistic with current pressures? The current pressures on the Gulf, and key to that is location and where we'll do that. Moving on to the actions, what do we need to do in that space? Again, we need to look at how we best engage with the aquaculture industry to support this mahi. Looking at legislative protection in perpetuity to prevent any further exploitation. And we saw some really compelling presentations around how time and again we have revisited fishing, harvesting the mussel stocks to collapse time and again in different locations, and a desire not to go back to that. Publicity, key. Again, like Livia said, how do you get visibility of this? It's happening under the water, so key is to get that visibility. How do we highlight the benefits? And again, through the talks, it came forward that there is a really compelling business case in here, not just environmentally, but economically, socially, and I'm sure within New Zealand context, culturally. So it's how do we tell that story? How do we build the knowledge and the evidence base to have a compelling story? And linked into that is how do we get all of government engaged in this, not just the environmental components, but the economic and the social components of government, looking at this mahi and saying this is something which would be good for New Zealand, good for our mandate. A whole of system approach is needed in this. So again, we heard there's no point fixing or looking to restore mussels and the reefs if sediment is going to continue to come in and to smother those systems. So the question there, I suppose, in the action is how do we connect the various systems, the various people, and the various mandates they have so that they're all working towards this without, I suppose, taking away any of their political mandate or their accountabilities. An interesting one here, so some of the Gulf, as we heard, was highly sedimented. There might be places where reefs are not viable. Is there a role for mussel farms to clean the worst sedimented areas? Dollars. They came up with you guys, they came up with us, in every group actually. How do we secure dollars? Where is that funding going to come from? One was just do it. Mussels are cheap. Get in there, we can afford a bit of collateral damage. It's an interesting one maybe to explore in the panel discussion. And monitoring procedures, how do we know if it's working? So key, it's all very well to establish them, but we've got to make sure that they're actually doing the job we want them to do. Linked to that, the barriers, again, the knowledge base around that. Where do we put them? What are the current conditions? What does success look like? Funding came up as barriers. A lot of talk around biosecurity and the desire to, we really want to restore the mauri of the Hauraki Gulf. If by putting in more substrate and more mussels, are we providing more habitat for invasive species? So the last thing you want to do is create a problem when you're trying to fix the problem. And again, we'll explore that with the panel. And again, barrier, lack of visibility of the public. Oh, and also another one, is there enough substrate out there? And would we need to put an artificial substrate to allow that goal to be reached? Then around the community, again, a lot of talk around visibility. How do we increase community engagement, get visibility of something that's occurring out of most people's range of sight? Supermarket demonstrations was a novel one that came up. There's mussels for sale in most supermarkets. We saw an awesome demonstration of a bit of muddy water in a glass. Next to it, drop a bog standard green lip mussel out of the supermarket. 15 minutes later, you've got clean water in this glass, dirty water still in that glass. Very, very powerful visual demonstration of what mussels can do in a system. Social media is another one, and education being key. An acknowledgement there is a lot of existing community engagement, and how do we best leverage off that? And then we'd had a bit of a discussion around who needs to be at this table. And essentially, the view I took out of it, looking at the feedback, was that everyone has a seat at the table when it comes to the environment. There was specific focus and mention made of iwi and getting iwi whānau and hapu engaged and understanding their aspirations and what they'd like to see occurring in the Gulf. Pacifica and Asian communities engaged, and how do we do that? I've already mentioned the all-of-government component. One about getting artisans and creatives involved in this space as well. Schools, the hospitality sector, the list goes on. So pretty much everyone engaged in that space. Yeah, and that was our team. And I think we're about ready now to move on to the
panels.
panel discussion. Thanks, team.
Thank you.